At 0247 hours on the 15th of March, 2026, Gulf time, a low thermal signature drone slipped into Bahraini airspace from the northeast quadrant, threaded 3 concentric rings of Skyguard radar coverage, evaded the NASAMS battery the U.S. Army had deployed around the port of Mina Salman, and slammed vertically into the rear exhaust stack of the destroyer USS Pinckney, DDG-91, moored at Charlie Pier of Naval Support Activity Bahrain. Payload: 4 kilograms of RDX with directional fragmentation. The blast tore through the thermal shielding of the exhaust manifold and killed in the same instant a 2-year-old machinist's mate from Indiana, a 3-year-old Filipino civilian contractor working in the galley, and a 8-year-old surface warfare officer from Wisconsin. 11 wounded, 4 critical. For the first time since the bombing of the USS Cole in October 2000, American blood ran on the deck of a 5th Fleet destroyer. At 0252 hours, the Pinckney's commanding officer transmitted a single encrypted sentence to Manama and to CENTCOM. Hostiles inbound. Catastrophic damage forward stack. 3 KIA. 5 minutes later, in a skiff buried inside the headquarters of U.S. Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base, Florida, the 4-star commanding general read the first forensic analysis of the drone fragment recovered by Pinckney's dive team. The rotor hub serial number matched a pattern previously documented in debris collected in Ukraine. Geran 2. Russian variant. Kupol Electromechanical Plant. Izhevsk. But the forensics went further. The Flight Control Board carried a Russian-made Kometa-M anti-jamming GNSS module and the same system the GRU had first deployed in Crimea in 2024. The propulsion unit ran on a Chinese MD-550 engine, never before documented in any Iranian Shahed variant, and the chassis bore a serial code beginning with KPIR, an internal Russian production identifier. No Western intelligence service had catalogued until the previous week, when a 3-4-year-old NGA imagery analyst, sitting in her cubicle in Springfield, Virginia, flagged it for the first time in a Maxar satellite frame of the industrial port of Bandar-e-Anzali, on the Iranian shore of the Caspian Sea. If you think this changes the war, drop Caspian in the comments. Because at 0310 hours, the 4-star walked into the chairman of the Joint Chiefs office at the Pentagon with a folder that rewrote the entire doctrine of the conflict. Russia wasn't shipping Geran 2 drones to Iran anymore. Russia had physically relocated part of the Kupol production line components, assembly jigs, calibration rigs, and 47 technicians out of Izhevsk and into a complex of 3 hangars built in 6 weeks inside the military perimeter of Anzali port on the southern Caspian shore. Estimated monthly output: 320 Geran, 2 drones with full Kometa-M guidance, STMD, enough to sustain the Iranian attack tempo against the Gulf for another 4 months. Enough to put 1 drone in the air every 2 hours, indefinitely, no matter how many launch sites the US flattened inside Iran proper. Striking Anzali meant bombing Russian-operated industrial infrastructure inside Iranian territory. It meant, in operational terms, attacking Russia. At 0334 hours, in the Situation Room of the White House, the president signed the most surgical and most dangerous strike authorization since the Natanz package in early February. Rules of engagement: 0 Russian technician casualties if avoidable. No fire on Iranian civilian structures. Mandatory 5-minute classified pre-notification to Moscow through the Sufan-Prujani deconfliction channel to prevent automatic Russian strategic forces response. Total mission duration: 31 hours. Point of origin: Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri. Platform: 2 B-2 Spirit bombers of the 393rd Bomb Squadron Tigers. Payload: 8 JASSM-XR AGM-158D extended-range stealth cruise missiles, quietly declared operational that same morning. with a published standoff range of 1,900 kilometers. Takeoff 061 2 hours. Zulu. Tanker support 8 kc 46. A Pegasus aircraft staged across the North Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and Turkish airspace. Fighter escort 2 F-22 Raptors of the 27th Fighter Squadron from RAF Lakenheath, England, riding shotgun as far as the Iraqi border. Backup 1 B-21 Raider, only recently declared at initial operational capability, wheels up from Whiteman, 2 hours behind the lead element, as the reserve strike asset, Operation Falling Comet. While the B-2S climbed through the troposphere over the mid-Atlantic, the other half of the operation was reaching its endgame in Tabriz, capital of Iran's East Azerbaijan province. At 0900 hours local, a 3-4-year-old woman holding an Austrian passport in the name of Magdalena Hoffmann walked into a cafe on Imam Khomeini Boulevard and sat down across from a 5-2-year-old FSB colonel named Alexei Markovich Sokolov, formerly listed as the cultural attaché at the Russian consulate in Tabriz, in reality, the GRU's senior liaison officer to Iran's aerospace force. Her name was not Magdalena. Her name was Yael. She had been running Sokolov as a controlled asset for the Mossad's Caesarea division for 11 months. Sokolov did not know this. Sokolov believed she was an Austrian arms trade reporter who had compromised herself badly enough on a trip to St. Petersburg in 2024 that he could blackmail her into low-grade industrial intelligence, mostly drone supply chain components. He had been feeding her information that flowed straight to a desk in Glilot Junction, north of Tel Aviv, for almost a year, and for the past 3 weeks. Every word he had said about the Kupol Electromechanical facility had been recorded, transcribed, and forwarded to CENTCOM J2. If you think the B-2s are about to deliver the kill shot, comment Spirit below, because at 1,041 hours local time in the Persian Gulf, the Spirits crossed the Iraqi border at 50,000 feet under radio silence, dropped into Iranian airspace by way of a sanitized corridor that the F-22 escorts had spent the previous 90 minutes electromagnetically sweeping, and entered the JASSM-XR launch box 380 nautical miles south of Bandar-e-Anzali. 6 minutes later, 8 missiles dropped sequentially from the rotary launchers in the Spirit's bomb bays. They added their Williams F-107 turbofans and went terrain following at 80 meters altitude over the spine of the Alborz Mountains. The Kometa-M jamming station that protected the Anzali industrial perimeter, the same Russian system that had blinded Iran's enemies during a year of war, could not see the JASSM-XR. The missile's seeker was designed against exactly that emitter family. Its terminal guidance switches from inertial to electro-optical against a preloaded target template in the final 60 seconds. At 1,128 hours local, the first 4 warheads detonated within 14 seconds of each other against the structural piers of Hangar 1, Hangar 2, and Hangar 3 of the Anzali complex. The next 4 struck the Kupol assembly fixtures, the Kometa-M calibration lab, and the diesel generator farm that powered the entire facility off the grid. Of the 47 Russian technicians on site, at the moment of impact, 40 were in a mandatory pre-shift briefing inside a hardened administrative bunker, 380 meters from the target area, exactly where U.S. intelligence had assessed they would be at that hour, on the basis of 3 weeks of Sokolov's debriefs in Tabriz. 5 were inside Hangar 2 during a fixture calibration. They died instantly. 2 were inside the calibration lab. They survived with severe burns. At the exact same minute, the warheads detonated in Anzali, in the cafe in Tabriz. Yael leaned across the table and asked Sokolov a question in Russian she had been waiting 11 months to ask. "Alexei, why did you tell Moscow last week that the Anzali facility was secure. Sokolov's expression changed in 3 stages across half a second: confusion, then dawning recognition, then the absolute cold professional understanding that he was, in this moment, finished. He reached for his coat pocket. Yael was faster. The 9mm round entered his sternum and exited through his shoulder blade. She walked out the back of the cafe into a white Saipa Pride sedan, driven by a second Mossad officer carrying a Turkish passport. By 11:35 hours, she was airborne over the Iranian-Turkish border in an MD-530F helicopter painted in Iraqi Kurdistan civilian markings, refueling once before crossing into Erbil. This was not a clean operation. By 11:42 hours, every Russian intelligence asset inside Iran, from Tehran to Bandar Abbas, knew the GRU's senior officer in northwestern Iran had been killed by what Moscow's first internal assessment would later call, almost certainly, a controlled foreign agent. 27 minutes after the JASSM-XR strike on Anzali, the Russian Foreign Ministry summoned the Chargé d'Affaires of the United States in Moscow and delivered a verbal note that the State Department would later describe in classified cable traffic as the harshest direct. The communication between Washington and Moscow since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. But the note was verbal. There was no public statement. There was no UN Security Council emergency session, because the Kremlin's biggest problem at that exact moment was not the spirits or the Mossad. The Kremlin's biggest problem was that no one inside the Russian government could publicly admit the United States had bombed a Russian drone factory and gotten away with it, because publicly admitting it required first admitting the factory existed at all, on Iranian soil, in direct contradiction of every public statement Moscow had made about the war since February 28. So the Kremlin did what the Kremlin does when caught in an undeniable strategic embarrassment. It stayed silent. The B-2 spirits crossed back into Turkish airspace at 1,308 hours local. The B-21 Raider, which had been holding 200 nautical miles east of the Anzali strike box as a reserve, never had to release its payload. Both spirits and the Raider returned to Whiteman after 31 hours and 14 minutes airborne. No combat losses. No Russian technicians killed inside the hardened bunker. No Iranian civilian casualties. The Kupol production line in Anzali was destroyed beyond economical repair. But this was not a clean victory either. NGA imagery from a Maxar Worldview Legion satellite tasked over the Caspian coast at 0700 hours Zulu on March 16 revealed something the Pentagon did not release for 10 days. 80 kilometers east of Anzali, in the smaller port city of Bab el-Sar, a fresh row of 3 identical hangars had begun construction during the previous 9 days, on the grounds of what was officially registered as a halal poultry processing complex. Same approximate footprint, same orientation, same access road to a military pier. The 40 Russian technicians who had survived the Anzali strike inside the hardened bunker were last tracked by Sigint, moving east along the M3 highway, in a convoy of unmarked panel vans, escorted by IRGC Aerospace Force ground vehicles. The Jaran, 2 production line had moved before the wreckage at Anzali finished smoldering. On the deck of the USS Pinckney, 3 sailors had died. 11 were on their way home wounded. In a cafe in Tabriz, an FSB colonel was being prepared for burial by a Russian Orthodox priest who didn't ask questions. In the Caspian dusk, 3 new hangars in a fishing town began to take shape, and in the Situation Room at MacDill, the 4-star commanding general read the satellite report and said only one sentence to his deputy, which the deputy later wrote down word for word in his personal journal: "We just bought ourselves 4 months. They already spent 3 of them. You, if you were the president at 0334 hours on March 15, knowing that bombing a Russian drone factory inside Iran meant the world would never know whether Moscow would respond, and never know how close you had brought everyone, Would you have signed the authorization? Or would you have waited for a diplomatic channel that the Iran 2 strikes weren't going to give you? Drop your answer in the comments. Hit subscribe for the next breakdown. Because in the Persian Gulf, the next 31 hours are always the ones that haven't happened yet.